In just a few seconds, an ordinary passenger flight would turn into one of the deadliest aviation disasters in history. High above the quiet Scottish countryside, hundreds of passengers were settling into their seats, sipping drinks, listening to music, and preparing for a long journey across the Atlantic. None of them knew that hidden among their luggage was something that would change the course of aviation security forever. And within moments, a peaceful evening in a small Scottish town would transform into chaos, fire, and tragedy. On December 21, 1988, a Boeing 747 operated by Pan American World Airways took off from London on a routine flight to New York. The aircraft, known as the Clipper Maid of the Seas, was flying as part of the route that connected Europe to the United States during the busy Christmas travel season. For many passengers, this flight was the final step of their journey home for the holidays. Families were waiting across the ocean, unaware that their loved ones would never arrive. The aircraft climbed steadily through the clouds after departing from London Heathrow Airport. On board were 243 passengers and 16 crew members. Many of them were American students, business travelers, and families returning home for Christmas. The flight seemed routine. The experienced crew guided the massive jet toward its cruising altitude, while cabin attendants began serving drinks and preparing for the long flight ahead. At around 31,000 feet above the United Kingdom, the plane approached the skies near the small town of Lockerbie. On the ground, the town's residents were going about their evening routines. Some were preparing dinner. Others were watching television or wrapping Christmas presents. It was just another cold winter night in a peaceful community of about 3,000 people. But suddenly the sky erupted. At exactly 7:02 p.m., a powerful explosion ripped through the forward cargo hold of the aircraft. Hidden inside a brown suitcase was a bomb carefully concealed within a portable radio. When the timer reached 0, the explosive device detonated with tremendous force. The blast tore a hole in the side of the fuselage and instantly shattered the structural integrity of the plane. Within seconds, the aircraft began to break apart in midair. The explosion created a shockwave that moved through the plane's structure like a violent ripple. The front section of the aircraft weakened almost immediately. Under the intense pressure difference between the cabin and the outside air, cracks spread rapidly through the metal skin. In just 2 or 3 seconds, the nose section detached completely. Passengers and debris were thrown into the freezing darkness thousands of meters above the ground. The rest of the aircraft followed shortly after. Engines broke away from the wings, sections of the fuselage twisted apart, and the massive wings eventually crashed into the ground near Lockerbie. When the fuel-filled wings struck the earth, they erupted into a massive fireball that could be seen for miles. The impact created a crater more than 50 meters long and over 10 meters deep. Entire houses were destroyed instantly, and burning debris rained down across the town and surrounding countryside. Residents rushed outside in shock and confusion. Many initially believed an earthquake or a military explosion had occurred. Flames lit up the sky while fragments of metal, luggage, and personal belongings lay scattered across fields and streets. Some residents discovered pieces of the aircraft in their gardens. Others encountered wreckage miles away from the main crash site. The scale of destruction became clear as emergency responders arrived. Rescue teams from across Britain rushed toward the small town, but there was little they could do. All 259 people aboard the aircraft had died, along with 11 residents on the ground. The tragedy claimed 270 lives in total. As news spread around the world, television broadcasts showed images of burning wreckage and devastated neighborhoods. What first appeared to be a terrible accident quickly raised suspicions. Witnesses reported seeing a massive fireball in the sky before the aircraft began to fall apart. Investigators soon discovered that the aircraft had not sent a distress signal before the disaster. This unusual detail led authorities to suspect that something catastrophic had happened suddenly and without warning. Within days, investigators confirmed their worst fears. Chemical traces found in the wreckage indicated the presence of a powerful explosive. The destruction of the aircraft had not been an accident. It was a deliberate act of terrorism. The disaster that would become known as the Pan Am Flight 103 bombing instantly triggered one of the largest criminal investigations ever conducted. Search teams began combing through the countryside for evidence. Police officers, soldiers, and volunteers worked side by side to collect every piece of debris they could find. Helicopters flew overhead to help locate fragments of the aircraft scattered across hundreds of square miles. Investigators followed a simple rule during the search. If an object was not a rock and not part of the landscape, it was collected and bagged as potential evidence. Over time, more than 16,000 pieces of debris were recovered. Investigators took tens of thousands of photographs and carefully documented every fragment. The evidence was eventually transported to a secure facility where experts began the painstaking process of reconstructing parts of the aircraft. Piece by piece, sections of the fuselage were reassembled like an enormous puzzle. Through this reconstruction, investigators identified the exact location where the explosion had occurred. The blast originated inside one of the luggage containers in the forward cargo hold. Inside the debris, forensic experts discovered small fragments of a suitcase that once contained the bomb. They also recovered tiny pieces of electronic circuitry. One fragment, smaller than a fingernail, would eventually become one of the most important clues in the entire investigation. After careful analysis, investigators determined that the circuit board belonged to a type of electronic timer used in explosive devices. Further investigation traced the timer to a Swiss electronics company that had previously supplied similar equipment to the Libyan military during the era of Muammar Gaddafi. This discovery shifted the focus of the investigation toward Libya. At the time, Libya had been linked to several international terrorist activities, and tensions between Libya and Western countries were already high. Investigators began examining whether Libyan intelligence agents might have been involved in placing the bomb on the aircraft. The investigation eventually led authorities to two suspects connected to Libyan intelligence services, Abdelbesset al-Megrahi and Lamin Khalifa Fima. According to prosecutors, the suspects allegedly placed the bomb inside a suitcase and arranged for it to travel through multiple airports before reaching the doomed flight. The luggage was believed to have originated in Malta, transferred through Frankfurt, and eventually loaded onto the aircraft in London. Years of diplomatic negotiations followed as international authorities attempted to bring the suspects to trial. Libya initially refused to extradite the men, arguing that they should be tried within their own country. After nearly a decade of political tension and international sanctions, a compromise was reached. The suspects would stand trial under Scottish law in a specially arranged court in the Netherlands at Camp Zeist. The trial began in 2000 and lasted several months. Hundreds of witnesses were called to testify, and thousands of pieces of evidence were examined. Families of the victims traveled from around the world to witness the proceedings and seek justice for their loved ones. In 2001, the judges delivered their verdict. Megrahi was found guilty of the bombing and sentenced to life imprisonment. Fima was acquitted due to insufficient evidence. For many people, the verdict appeared to bring closure to the long investigation. But for others, it raised even more questions. Some legal experts and observers argued that the evidence against Megrahi was not strong enough to prove his guilt beyond doubt. Critics questioned the reliability of key witness testimony and the interpretation of forensic evidence. One of the most vocal critics was a British doctor whose daughter had died in the disaster. He spent years campaigning for a new investigation, convinced that the full truth had not yet been revealed. The controversy grew even further in 2009 when Megrahi was released from prison on compassionate grounds after being diagnosed with terminal cancer. He returned to Libya, where he was welcomed by supporters who viewed him as a political scapegoat. 3 years later, he died, leaving many questions unanswered. Decades after the bombing, investigators continued searching for additional suspects. In 2020, another Libyan intelligence officer, Abu Ajila Massoud, was charged with allegedly building the bomb used in the attack. According to prosecutors, Massoud admitted his role during questioning in Libya years earlier. However, he later claimed the confession had been forced and denied any involvement. Today, nearly 4 decades after the tragedy, the Lockerbie bombing remains one of the most complex and controversial investigations in modern history. New evidence occasionally surfaces, and debates about the case continue among investigators, historians, and families of the victims. For the residents of Lockerbie, the memory of that night has never faded. The town rebuilt itself over the years, but the scars of the disaster remain deeply embedded in its history. Every December, memorial services are held to honor the lives that were lost. Families gather to remember their loved ones and to continue the search for answers. Because despite years of investigations, trials, and political negotiations, one haunting question still lingers in the minds of many people. Was the true story behind the bombing ever fully uncovered, or are there still secrets about that night waiting to be revealed?